Alright, picture a summer morning in the Sierra Nevada mountains, July 17th, 1982. A hiking trail above Lake Tahoe, where the air smells like pine and the water below glitters like a postcard. Two hikers moving along a popular path called Sheep's Flat, just off the Mount Rose Highway, above a little resort town called Incline Village. A perfect day, the kind of day people drive hours to experience, and then they see her. A woman, face down on the ground, not sleeping, not resting, shot twice in the back of the head. She was wearing a powder blue t-shirt, blue jeans, yellow tennis shoes, and underneath her clothes, a bathing suit. She had come to the lake to swim. She had come to enjoy a summer day. And someone had walked her onto that trail and executed her. But here's what makes this case different from every other murder you've ever heard about. It wasn't just that police didn't know who killed her. Police didn't know who she was. No purse, no wallet, no identification of any kind, no missing person report that matched her, no frantic family calling the station. No one, anywhere in America, was looking for this woman. She was murdered twice, in a sense. Once by a bullet and once by silence. For 37 years she lay in a nameless grave in a Reno cemetery, while her killer's identity sat locked inside a sealed evidence kit, waiting for a technology that hadn't been invented yet, and when the answer finally came, it didn't just solve one mystery, it solved two. And it made history in a way no cold case in American history ever had before. This is the story of the woman they called Sheep's Flat Jane Doe. It's the story of the detectives who refused to let her stay nameless. And it's a story about what happens when a person slips through every crack a society has, and how science finally reached down into the dark and pulled her back out. Let's start with what the investigators had that morning, because it was almost nothing. A woman somewhere between 25 and 35 years old. Dead less than 24 hours, 2 gunshot wounds, evidence of a sexual assault, documented and preserved in a kit that would sit in an evidence room for decades, and a handful of physical clues that led detectives in exactly the wrong direction. She had an inoculation scar and unusual dental work, and based on those details, investigators initially believed she might be European. Think about that. From day one, the search for her name was pointed across an ocean away from the truth. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office did what good departments do. They compared her against missing person reports, not a few. Hundreds of missing women who matched her general description were checked against her fingerprints, her dental records, and eventually her DNA, and every single one was excluded, one by one, no by no, year after year. Somewhere out there, this woman had been born, had gone to school, had laughed with friends, had lived an entire life, and not one thread of that life reached into the case file. So the system did the only thing it could. It gave her a placeholder name, Sheep's Flat Jane Doe, after the trail where she was found, and it gave her a grave. She was buried at our Mother of Sorrows Catholic Cemetery in Reno, Nevada. No headstone with a name, no family at the service. A woman resting in a lonely, anonymous plot in a city she may have only visited for a single summer day. And the detectives who worked her case grew older. Some retired, some passed away. The file stayed open, but the trail, like the woman herself, had gone cold in the mountains. Now let me tell you who she really was, because you need to understand her life to understand why nobody came looking. Her name, the name police wouldn't learn for 37 years, was Mary Edith Silvani. She was born on September 29, 1948, in Pontiac, Michigan, and she grew up around Detroit. She was the only daughter of John and Blanche Silvani, and she had 2 brothers, Charles and Bob. And her childhood, by every account that survives, was a slow-motion tragedy. Her father struggled with homelessness, her mother spent years in and out of psychiatric institutions, and Mary reportedly didn't speak about her family to friends or classmates. She carried her pain the way so many children of chaos do. Quietly, invisibly behind a smile. There is exactly one confirmed school photo of her. The class of 1966, Mackenzie High School, Detroit. One face among rows of teenagers, all of them about to scatter into their futures. By the time that photo was taken, Mary's world was already collapsing. Her parents died when she was just 16, leaving her and her brothers essentially homeless. At 24, she became pregnant, and likely because of her circumstances, she gave the child up for adoption. In 1974, she was arrested in Detroit for loitering, a minor misdemeanor. Police took her fingerprints that day and filed them away. Nobody in that station could have imagined those ink smudges would one day become the single thread connecting a nameless body in Nevada back to a real human being. Sometime after that, Mary moved west to California with her brothers, and then she did what people running from painful histories often do. She drifted. She slowly lost contact with her siblings, and what she did between 1974 and 1982 remains almost a complete blank. Investigators were never able to locate anyone who truly knew her during those years. Here's the part that should stop you cold. When Mary vanished, her extended family and old friends didn't report her missing. They assumed she had simply moved away by choice, and they hoped she was out there somewhere living a good life. They hoped, while she lay in an unmarked grave in Reno, the people who once loved her were imagining her happy. Her brothers died without ever learning what became of their sister. That is the real horror of this case, not just a murder, an erasure. While Mary lay unidentified in that Nevada cemetery, The man who killed her was living his life in California. His name was James Richard Curry, and his story is the dark mirror of hers. Curry was born in Texas in 1946, and even his birth was a secret. He was born out of wedlock and raised under a different family name, a detail that would matter enormously 4 decades later, because it built a genealogical wall around his true identity. As a young man in Texas, he was arrested for robbery and sent to the state prison in Huntsville. He was released in 1977 and moved to California, where he worked at a locksmith shop and later managed a storage lot in Santa Clara. A working man, a neighbor, a face in the crowd. Nobody looking at him would have seen what he was. And what he was, investigators would eventually confirm, was a serial killer. 5.5 months after Mary Silvani was shot on that Tahoe trail in early January 1983, Curry was arrested in connection with another murder. And once he was in custody, the confession started. He admitted to a 1982 killing in Santa Clara and to murdering a couple, Gerald and Sharon Novoselats, who ran a rival storage facility in the San Jose area. He was also suspected in a 4th murder, a victim whose remains were never found. 4 lives at minimum, connected to one quiet man with a locksmith's hands. And then, the escape. Just days after his arrest, before he ever faced a jury, before any court could pronounce judgment, Curry took his own life in the Santa Clara County Jail. He died in January 1983, taking his secrets with him. And here's the devastating part. When he died, no one on earth knew he had ever been to Lake Tahoe. No one connected him to the woman on the trail. His name was never written in her file. The case against him didn't go cold. It never existed. The killer was dead, the victim was nameless, and the truth was buried in 2 separate graves, hundreds of miles apart, with no line connecting them. For 36 years, that line simply did not exist. Cold cases don't crack because someone works harder. They crack because someone thinks differently. And in 2015, a detective named Dave Jenkins with the Washoe County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit did exactly that. For over 3 decades, the working assumption had pointed overseas, the European theory, built on a vaccine scar and dental work. Jenkins looked at the same file everyone else had looked at and asked a different question. What if she wasn't foreign at all? What if she was American from the western United States? And what if the reason no missing person report ever matched her was heartbreakingly simple? What if she had voluntarily cut ties with her family and friends in the years before her death, so that when she disappeared, nobody realized she was gone? Sit with that theory for a moment, because it turned out to be almost exactly right. Jenkins had essentially profiled her loneliness. He looked at the absence of evidence, no report, no inquiry, no search, and understood that the absence itself was the evidence. This was a woman who had already vanished from her own life before someone ended it. It was a brilliant piece of reasoning, but a theory is not a name, and the department still had no way to find one. What they needed hadn't been built yet. And then in February 2018, it arrived. Here's where the story pivots on something so small it almost feels accidental. In February 2018, a Washoe County forensic investigator attended a lecture. That's it. A lecture? The speaker was Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick of Identifinders International, a pioneer in something called forensic genetic genealogy, the science of taking crime scene DNA, uploading it to public ancestry databases, and building family trees backward until they converge on a single person. Detectives from the sheriff's office approached Fitzpatrick about the Jane Doe case, and here's the detail that deserves respect. They did it before this technique became world famous through the Golden State Killer arrest. Fitzpatrick herself later credited the department for genuinely forward thinking. They weren't following a trend, they were ahead of it. The plan came together fast. DNA from the case was processed and uploaded to the public database GDmatch and the DNA Doe Project, a volunteer organization of genealogists who identify nameless victims, went to work, and in the branching mathematics of shared DNA matches began to appear. Distant cousins, faint genetic echoes. The volunteers traced those echoes backward through census records, marriage records, obituaries, until the tree narrowed to one couple in Detroit, Michigan, John and Blanche Silvani. A couple with 3 sons and 1 daughter, Mary. In July 2018, the DNA Doe Project announced the Jane Doe had been tentatively identified, but tentative isn't enough for a murder file. And this is where 1974 reached forward through time. Remember that loitering arrest in Detroit? The Detroit Police Department still had Mary's fingerprints on file from that day. Washoe County detectives compared them against the prints taken from the body in 1982. They matched in September 2018. Her identity was confirmed. After 36 years, Sheep's Flat Jane Doe had a name, a birthday, a hometown, and a face in a high school yearbook. But the sheriff's office made a decision. They kept the name secret because they weren't finished. They had identified the victim. Now they were going to identify the killer. The evidence kit collected in 1982 had preserved something beyond value, the killer's DNA. For 36 years, that genetic signature had waited in storage, useless, because there was nothing to compare it to. Now, investigators uploaded it the same way they had uploaded Mary's and began building the killer's family tree. The trail led to Texas. The DNA showed the suspect was the grandson of a couple living there. Detectives found the couple's known grandson, tested the theory, and cleared him. He wasn't the killer, and that should have been a dead end. Except the DNA don't lie. If the known grandson was innocent, then there had to be a grandson nobody knew about. And that's exactly what it was. The genetic evidence indicated the suspect was a child born out of wedlock, fathered by one of the couple's sons. A hidden branch on the tree, a person deliberately obscured by the social shame of another era. This is where a genealogist named Cheryl Hester earned her place in this story. Through what investigators described as sheer tenacity, she identified the suspect's mother as one of two sisters living in the same Dallas neighborhood, a woman who had a son outside of marriage and raised him under a completely different family name. Follow that name, and it led to one man, James Richard Curry. Born Texas, 1946, robbery conviction. Huntsville Prison, released 1977, moved to California, arrested January 1983, confessed to multiple murders, dead by his own hand before trial. There was one final step. Curry had 2 children. Investigators reached out and asked if they would voluntarily provide DNA samples. They said yes. Let that sink in. The killer's own children chose to help close the case their father left behind. Their samples were compared against the evidence from 1982, and the tests confirmed the link between Curry and the killing. The circle was closed. The man who murdered Mary Silvani on a mountain trail in the summer of 1982 had been dead for 36 years, but he had finally been caught on May 7th. 2019, the Washoe County Sheriff's Office stepped in front of cameras and told the world both names at once. The victim, Mary Edith Silvani; the killer, James Richard Curry. Case closed. Sheriff Darren Balaam called it an incredible story and praised the decades of work across generations of investigators. And Detective Kathleen Bishop said something that should be printed on the wall of every police academy, that if every person along the way hadn't done their job across all those years, the case would never have been solved. The evidence technician in 1982 who preserved the kit. The Detroit officer in 1974 who filed the fingerprints. Detective Jenkins and his 215 theory. The investigator who sat in that 208 lecture. The volunteers. The genealogists. The killer's own children. A 37-year relay race, and every single runner mattered. And here's the historic part. This became recognized as the first known case in which both the victim and the perpetrator were identified through investigative genetic genealogy. Not the Golden State Killer. Not the famous cases you've seen in documentaries. This one, a forgotten woman on a Nevada hiking trail, became the case that proved the technology could resurrect the identity of the nameless and unmask the guilty. In the same investigation, Mary Silvani, a woman who slipped through every crack in the system while she was alive, changed the future of criminal justice after her death. And after the announcement, there was one more piece of unfinished business. Officials began discussing placing a headstone on that lonely grave in Reno, a stone that would finally carry her name. The story of Mary Silvani teaches lessons that reach far beyond one trail in Nevada. Lessons for every family, every community, every person. Watching this right now, the first lesson is about the people who drift. Mary wasn't reported missing because everyone assumed she had simply moved on and hoped she was happy. Nobody checked. If there is someone in your life who has drifted, a sibling you haven't called, a cousin who fell out of touch, an old friend who went quiet, reach out. A single phone call, a single message, keeps a person tethered to the world. The greatest gift Mary never received was one person, anywhere, saying, "I noticed you were gone." The second lesson is about evidence and patience. That kit sat in an evidence room for 36 years before science caught up to it. The fingerprints sat in Detroit for 44. Nothing preserved is ever wasted. If you have information about an unsolved crime, even something from decades ago, even something that feels too small to matter, report it. In America, you can contact Crime Stoppers anonymously. The detail you're holding might be the last runner in someone else's relay race. And the third lesson is the hardest one. Justice does not always look like a courtroom. Curry never faced a jury for what he did to Mary. Her brothers died not knowing. Her killer died not answering, and yet her name was restored. Her story was told. Her grave will bear the truth. Sometimes justice isn't a verdict. Sometimes it's a headstone that finally says who you were. Mary Silvani should have had a different life. A childhood without chaos. A family that stayed whole. A swim in Lake Tahoe on a beautiful July day, and then a drive home. Instead, she became a Jane Doe for 37 years, until a chain of strangers, most of whom were never in the same room, refused to let her stay one. She was lost longer than she was alive. But she is not lost anymore.